Our guest is Rula Jamal of Al-HAQ, one of the leading organizations, civil society organization, which investigates human rights violations in Palestine and what has been happening in Jenin, which has been termed as one of the biggest assaults in decades on the West Bank. We've seen news reports and horrifying footage coming out of Jenin, where people have been saying that it's a sort of a repeat of Nakba, or the fact that Nakba has never really ended for Palestinians.
The assault started on the 3rd of July during the very early hours of the morning at around 1 a.m. The Israeli occupation forces, what they did is that they coercively evicted Palestinians from their houses. More than 4,000 persons were coercively evicted from their houses, and they didn't have anywhere to go.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the New Wave Global and Nayadar. I'm Rabia Mehmood. Today we are here with a special guest and a very horrifying latest development which has unfolded in Palestine. Our guest is Rula Jamal of Al-HAQ, one of the leading organizations, civil society organization, which investigates human rights violations in Palestine, and it's been doing it for years. And Rula is a leading officer with the organization. We're going to speak about what has been happening in Jenin, which has been termed as one of the biggest assaults in decades on the West Bank. We've seen news reports and horrifying footage coming out of Jenin, where people have been saying that it's a sort of a repeat of Nakba, or the fact that Nakba has never really ended for Palestinians. And the news reports say that there have been 12 deaths so far. We've seen really brutal footage and videos and basically photographs of young men lying dead on the streets. And these have mostly, from what I've seen, at least when the numbers were they were at 9, the targeted killings were of young teenage Palestinians, if I'm not inaccurate. It's not that the assault on Palestinian freedoms, because it's an active occupation, has ever been put to stop in that country, but this recent assault has been very targeted and has been brutal, as I've said. Rula, thank you for joining us on such short notice. Can you basically just tell us exactly what is happening at the moment in Jenin and in Palestine? Yes, Rula is, by the way, in Ramallah at the moment. So yeah, thanks again for joining us on such short notice.
Thank you, Rabia, and may the Palestinians that were killed rest in peace. Indeed, just let me give you a very quick brief of what happened. The assault started on the 3rd of July during the very early hours of the morning at around 1 a.m., where huge military vehicles and military heavy equipment raided and invaded the city and the refugee camp of Jenin from different directions, using 4 different units that we know of so far. So 4 specialized Israeli occupation forces units, including the unit of artillery, the units of spyware and network, and the units of the unit that is that raids with dogs that are trained to attack, and another one that is specific for the equipment and functioning of heavy machinery weapons, in addition to several attacks from aerial attacks. So the attack was not only from the ground, but also there were bombing, and this is also new. Since 2002, there has not been bombardments from aerial attacks, but those last 2 weeks. So this was not the first time this month, but the second that the Israeli occupation forces decide to bombard from aerial attacks. In addition to surveillance airplanes that were flying over Jenin about 6 to 8 different ones surveilling every single person, every single place. So the result is extreme demolition and extreme destruction that is actually unprecedented. So in 48 hours, the Israeli occupation vehicles, the Israeli occupation forces managed to demolish and damage the main and essential infrastructure in the refugee camp and also different areas from Jenin. The electricity was cut, the water was cut. It is still until now cut from many areas in Jenin, as well as of course, the internet and any way for people to actually get their voices out. Snipers were spread on the roofs of many different buildings. The Israeli occupation forces, what they did is that they coercively evicted Palestinians from their houses. They did not want to leave, the Palestinians, but they forced them with guns and weapons to leave their houses. More than 4,000 families, more than 4,000 persons were coercively evicted from their houses, and they didn't have anywhere to go. A lot of people went to different mosques or even the square of the hospital. In addition to the attack, also included soldiers attacking and raiding houses and destroying the walls within houses so that they can move around the houses because that is the way they thought that it could be safer for them to move from one place to another instead of using the streets. So the demolitions and the destruction in these houses are unbelievable. They also raided many, the hospital, for example. there is one governmental hospital in Jenin that received so many tear gas bombs in the hospital, and that is of course a huge violation of international law, let alone every single action that was put and the collective punishment for the entire families. More than 12,000 families were surrounded, and an intent, like a natural curfew, because people were extremely scared for their lives, happened in the refugee camp of Jenin, where they did not dare to leave their houses because the snipers were shooting, using the shoot to kill policy in a scene of extreme state terror against civilians, children, elderly, women, sick people. I mean, if the hospitals were attacked with bullets and tear bomb gas, so you can imagine the amount. I just got off the phone with my colleague that is our field researcher in Jenin. He is trembling while talking to me because today was the only day that they actually managed to enter the refugee camp. He told me that everything is destroyed. The amount of destroyed houses, streets, main streets are incredible. The use of the D9 military bulldozer that is manufactured by the company of Caterpillar, used by the Israeli occupation forces army, is significant because this vehicle is extremely huge, and it's mere passing by a road means an entire destroyal of it without even using the bulldozing tool that it also has annexed to it. Still, water and electricity are not back on. Still, the evicted families, they cannot go back to their houses because their houses are fully destroyed. We do not know the amount of houses, the number of properties that have been destroyed yet, because that will take 2, 3, 4 days to be able to survey and count those in relation to the injured persons. There is more than 112 injured Palestinians. 10 are in very critical situation. They are in the emergency units right now. So the number might may God forbid, increase. As we said, 12 Palestinians, 12 martyrs were killed in this attack. Among them, at least 3 are children. We are still trying to confirm the numbers, but according to the Ministry of Health, these are the numbers. The amount of detention. So the Israeli soldiers also, through their raids and raids into houses, they detained a lot of people. Some of them were interrogated in a ad hoc or a temporary interrogation center that was specifically done in Jenin by the Israeli occupation forces, and others were taken into more permanent interrogation centers. We don't know yet the number of people detained, and there is also a number of disappeared persons. Some families are showing pictures of their children and their relatives looking for them and asking if anyone has seen them. So we still don't know the amount of damage, whether it is casualties of persons or property casualties. We're waiting until we get more information, but the images we are receiving and the reports are extremely horrific. And we are extremely alarmed of the amount of force and the amount of lethal weapons that were used. More than 100 Israeli military vehicles were used, more than 1,400 soldiers, Israeli occupation soldiers, were used in this operation against Jenin, of course, and they were supported by the US and the UK to perform this.
Yeah, so I was just, thank you so much for this very detailed sort of summary of what is going on with the details of the kind of brutalities. And it's horrifying to see that people, these were refugees. It was a refugee camps, and now people have been made to evict and flee forcibly from the refugee camps. So these are people who are refugees multiple times over now. We've seen some calls by the United Nations asking for donations for the UN, RWA is asking for donations and all. We've seen some reporting, and like you're saying, that it's like the use of the damages on a massive scale. There have been helicopters and gunships used on the refugee camps in this raid, and it's just like you say, the scale is sort of very massive, and so much that you're the head of monitoring and documentation at Al-HAQ, and you're still in the process of documenting and seeing what more could happen. My question, I interrupted you because you were speaking of the US and the UK. I wanted to basically now get to the response of the international community. How do you see that? Because you're also engaged in advocacy from the Al-HAQ's platform. Can you please just, elaborate on the response of not just the US and the UK? Of course, it's the US taxpayers' money, which is funding, these this assault, but also the EU and other countries in the Middle East. How do you see the response or the lack of response from the international community?
Yeah, well, I mean, lack of response is the answer. There is a total purity for the Israeli actions, and this, regardless of the government. Now we can see an extreme right-wing government, but this did not change the amount of support and allies that the Israeli occupation state has from major powers in the world, specifically the USA. Then, of course, this is very disappointing for us, that we work with international law. We believe that there are tools that should be used to provide protection for the people of Palestine, the people under occupation. And there are very clear methods and tools that could be used, but unfortunately, none of these are being used. Our people are being targeted intentionally by the Israeli occupation forces, and no sense of accountability has been applied. And this has been the case for so many years. This is not something new. The disappointment is not something new. And of course, it is horrible to see that such a situation is happening in front of cameras, and yet so little is actually being done in relation to concrete and effective action against the occupation state that is the attacker.
Yeah, and you were saying that the approval of the US and the UK. Can you elaborate a bit on that? Yeah.
Yes, there has been repeated statements from these countries that Israel has a right to protect itself, but there was definitely no mentioning of the Palestinians' right rights to be protected and right to life, and also right to resistance. I mean, even international law gives the right of people under occupation to resist occupation, of course, according to the regulations of international law. But this is a right, and as far as we know, the US and the UK and the rest of the world do recognize the occupation of Palestine and the occupation of the Palestinian territories. But unfortunately, the actions do not show any recognition or any consideration of the rights of Palestinians, the rights of civilians, the rights of children, women, elderly, sick people. I mean, we have seen pictures and live streaming of the hospital being attacked by tear gas that is actually very poisoning. And there are sick and injured people inside that hospital, and yet there is nothing that is protected. There is nothing that is respected by the Israeli occupation forces, and they have never been held accountable for these continuous attacks against our people.
You have told us about like some of the footage. Yes, some of this footage has made it to international press, not all of it. And we've seen like cameras being hit. We've seen families being evicted. Just very shortly, last question. Where are these families from the refugees camps? Thousands of families, as you've mentioned, and thousands of people. Where are they, those who have been forcibly evicted? Where are they housed now? Like, or where are they where's their temporary relocation? Yes.
Yeah. Well, some had relatives and families that they could go to outside of the refugee camp. Some took shelter in different municipality buildings, such as schools or mosques or big wedding halls, stuff like that. So big halls, basically. And some remain in the streets, unfortunately. But today, after the withdrawal of the Israeli occupation forces from Jenin last night, today was the first day that people could enter and see the results of the attack and the horrible damages. We're still unfolding what exactly happened. We still don't know what kind of damages, what kind of weaponry was used. Most of the injuries were from live ammunition and also missiles that were hit towards people and towards houses. So we don't know how many of these houses could be rehabilitated and how long it would take. We know that the municipality have put some signals on some houses that are no longer safe to be inhabited again. So probably those will have to be demolished and rebuilt. So yes, the amount of destruction is huge. This will require a lot of work, a lot of months of reparations, a lot of funding. So the situation of the people is terrible. And bear in mind that Jenin is close to the coast, so it's 38 degrees now, and people are outside in the sun, regardless of their specific needs, which is also a terrible situation for them. Some of the houses that people managed to enter after the attack were totally destroyed. the furniture inside the houses, even the food storage, some of the houses, even that was entirely destroyed. So there was a sense that the idea is not just that this is a raid of the camp, but also to actually infringe and terrorize people in a collective punishment, because so that they are not supporting the resistance and the freedom fighters, because the people of Jenin, of course, and the refugee camp constitutes the social support and the network for the fighters. So this is very important to bear in mind, that there is an intention for terrorizing, and this was also very, very clear from the images and from the destruction that we see.
Yes, Rula, thanks so much again for sort of giving us more details of what has been happening and speaking to us, taking the time out to speak to us. You must be very busy at the moment. This was, for our viewers, this was the latest from what's happening in WestBank from our friend in Palestine. If you want to follow more work of Al-HAQ, you can go to the website and take a look. They've been documenting all kinds of human rights abuses in Palestine for years, and been documenting and investigating them very thoroughly. Please follow their work. And yes, thanks for watching our show. Thanks to our guest. Khuda Hafiz.